Good evening, all, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Economy, Place, Access and Transport Scrutiny Committee. We have another interesting agenda ahead of us tonight. And before I get started, we have one apology to raise, which is from Councillor Vassie, and in his absence is Councillor Knight. Welcome to the Funhouse, Councillor Knight. Any declarations of interest to raise? Councillor Merritt, or are you just moving your microphone? Oh. Fair enough. No other declarations by the looks of it. Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Any comments on those, colleagues? Councillor Stewart.
Didn't really forgot. Right, so it's only a minor thing. But on the item, so the last item, if you remember the local site, the LC whip basically, and how it related to Copmanthorpe, and we had the situation where the draft had it proposing the route that Network Rail and everyone like that would like to change the right of way to, rather than the current right of way. And I felt, as Copmanthorpe did, that we should stick with the route as is rather than speculate. And it's just the wording's not as strong as it could be, because it says the committee recommended officers explore including the current public rights of way, whereas I proposed, and I think the committee was happy, that we just have the current rights of way rather than explore it.
Yeah, and from memory, there was no opposition to that from anyone in the room. I'd be happy to amend that section in line with what you're saying. But can the committee allow us to take that offline and allow Councillor Stewart to agree a form of words?
Well, it's literally just change officers explore including to officers include.
Fair enough, nice and easy. Happy with that? Thanks, Councillor Stewart. Right, which then brings me to public participation. We have two speakers tonight, for which we're always grateful for. I'm not sure who's first, forgive me. Okay, so we have Flick Williams as our first speaker, who's joining us remotely. Flick, can you hear us?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening to you too. Thanks for joining us once again. You know the drill. You have about 3 minutes, but I'm not going to be really tight with the cut-off point there. But let's not take it too far. So fire away.
Elected members will no doubt be aware of recent media coverage of the Christmas market blue badge ban. The report points to the principles laid out in the consultation prior to the reversal of the permanent ban. Principle 2, the acceptance of temporary reintroduction during the Christmas market, was not universally accepted, and there were, of course, numerous respondents who were non-disabled and not affected. It does rather beg the question that if it is accepted that our human rights were breached by the permanent ban, how are they not breached by a temporary ban? Because Christmas market aside, regular life carries on for those 5 weeks of the year, and disabled people are once again restricted in their access to goods and services, and in particular social activities. The St Sampson Centre, offering older disabled people events to alleviate social isolation, is going to be particularly hard hit this time around. During the permanent ban, the Dial-A-Ride bus had exemption to access the centre, but since its demise at the end of last year, older disabled people who rely on door-to-door transport will have no alternative means of accessing their social activities during the festive period. Loneliness is felt by many most acutely at this time of year. And this time around, no mention of mitigations beyond the usual peripheral car parks, which are too far away. Probably just as well to keep quiet on the subject, because the long-promised additional seating in the city centre that might have enabled some to do the distance has not materialised. The publication of the open data on blue badge holders accessing the city centre has enabled the usual suspects, the self-appointed grand viziers of the foot streets, to indulge in some totally reprehensible disability hate on social media. On the basis of fewer blue badge holders coming now than before the permanent ban, one such person has erroneously deduced that many coming before checks were in place must have been using blue badges fraudulently. Others just content themselves with calculating the cost of every blue badge holder's entry. But what price human rights? That is the cost of genuine inclusion, nobody left behind. Of course, it doesn't occur to these ableists that after 4 years of permanent exclusion, many disabled people forced to go elsewhere for goods and services had settled into routines that took them away from York. And now, of course, they're being forced to do so again. The most alarming part of this report before you is paragraph 16, access using technology. A booking system or gaining access by showing one's blue badge to an inaccessible camera do not need further work because they are totally unworkable and not at all fair or equitable. Both create additional barriers for disabled people as understood by reference to the social model of disability. You know, that model that council voted unanimously to adopt exactly 2 years ago last Sunday. If anything needs further work, it is embedding a social model understanding into the practice and decision making of this authority. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Flick. Comfortably in time there as well. We'll absolutely take your comments into account and hopefully we can make reference to them during the related discussions. Thank you. Our next speaker is Mrs. Georgina Duffield, who's with us in the room. Awesome. Well, welcome, Georgina. Feel free to take a seat, please. Is this your first time speaking? Yeah, okay. So when you start your 3 minutes, just make sure your mic is pressed so it's showing green. Absolutely fine. Yeah. You know, go at your leisure. Really, I'm not going to be really tight with timings anyway, within reason. So whenever you're ready, fire away.
Right. I live on the east side of the city, and I would just like to highlight, if you're probably already aware, the parlous state of the roads in the area where I live, Heworth Osborwick area. Stray Road in Heworth Without area, which I think is in Councillor Ayres' ward, is a particular example of one of the roads in my area, which is in a horrendous state of repair. It's full of deep holes, I would guess some being up to 8 to 10 centimetres deep, which are extremely dangerous for everyone, but especially for cyclists, which I am one. And again, obviously the clocks are going back this weekend. We're coming up to winter, which means longer, darker evenings, which means that these holes and deep ridges in road surfaces are much harder to see, especially for cyclists, and potentially life-threatening. I know that my local area is not alone in having to put up with the dangerous state of roads. In fact, I've observed that this appears to be an issue across the whole city. My question is, how would the committee like to justify likely increased levels of council tax in the coming financial year when the tax-paying public are just expected to put up with such poorly maintained roads, which, excluding a few minor exceptions, seem to get worse with every year that passes? My assumption is that taxpayers would like to see some tangible improvements to local infrastructure, roads being arguably the most visible, especially after being expected to pay increased levels of council tax. That's my first point. The other thing I want to bring up is, again, I can mainly speak for my area, which is the east of the city, Heworth Osborwick area. So in my area of the city, I've noticed that in the last 2 years or so, especially during the summer months, that we're expecting a much higher volume of air traffic, much of which seems to fly at low altitudes. This creates a real noise pollution problem, which I've lived in that area for 12 years, and I've only noticed it in the last couple of years. Never seemed to exist before. Indeed, in the last couple of years, I sometimes feel like I'm living under the Heathrow flight path. It's that bad, and I'm not exaggerating, especially bad at weekends. I'd like to ask the committee if a change in flight paths has been authorised in the area in the past 2 or 3 years, and why this decision was taken, as seemingly limitless numbers of aircraft are being allowed to fly over densely populated areas, which are obviously creating a serious noise pollution issue and affecting the quality of life in our area of the city. I've noticed that aircraft will fly sometimes as early as 6 o'clock in the morning and sometimes as late as gone midnight. And I'm just thinking, you know, I'm not one of these people, but people with young children will get woken up by the noises because they're flying so low. I just think it's horrific for quality of life, and just the noise pollution is ridiculous. I've raised this issue through my local councillor, Mark Waters, who contacted the RAF about this issue as he believed I was making a valid point. They replied...
You're able to wrap up now because we're
Oh.
it's all right, we're quite well over, but...
Okay, they just one paragraph. They replied saying that every effort is made to spread the disturbance from military flying training as widely and equitably as possible. And it's limited to what is strictly necessary for aircrew to achieve and maintain operational effectiveness. However, I've observed that many of these aircraft seem to be small pleasure aircraft flown from the several airfields around York.
Okay, look,
yeah.
we're 1 minute over now, so I'll have to draw you to a close there.
Yeah, okay, but I would just like that issue to be addressed.
I mean, I'll level with you. That's the first time I've on air traffic. I've never really thought about that as a councillor, and I don't think a lot of us will have done. But I doubt the council has any control over that.
But I just thought I would raise it.
And absolutely value it, and it's something that we could all still look into as councillors, because there will be other agencies that will be, but it's a completely new one. On roads, it's not this committee's job to justify increases in council tax. It's our job to scrutinise decisions that are made. Completely hear you on roads. It's a universal concern, nationwide concern, but interesting, you might have seen in one of the reports that we'll come to next, our performance on road repairs is touched on, so we will have a discussion about it, especially given that you've made comments on it. So grateful for you coming down. Nice one. You're welcome to stay with us if you want. You might have more interesting things to do. Okay, we normally ask you to politely leave the table, but stay in the room. Nice one. Thank you. Right, so back onto the agenda. You have to forgive me, I'm flicking between all sorts here. Yeah, so our next item is Finance and Performance Monitor 1 for the 24-25 year. We have Patrick Looker presenting for us. I mean, Patrick, you're well versed in this. If you could give a very brief summary, but let's take the paper as read. And hopefully we'll get some interesting questions about its content.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, good evening. This is the Monitor 1 Finance and Performance Report for Economy Place Access Transport Service Area, and it uses data that was considered by Executive on 12th September 2024. The key elements for this particular scrutiny, from paragraph 13, you'll see more detailed analysis of the financial position across the service areas. I think the two which is worth highlighting for this particular meeting is across waste. We've got underspends anticipated from revenue earned from selling surplus capacity at AWRP, alongside relatively strong recycling prices remaining, giving us saving of about £300,000. There's also savings on vehicle maintenance and reduced your waste prices. Please note that this particular report was written at the end of Q1, which was before the garden waste rollout had happened, and so we were still estimating what the take-up of garden waste would be at that point in time, and we'd really just factored in the reduced price for the year, so we were expecting about £500,000 shortfall. In reality, numbers have been a lot stronger than that, and we're probably only expecting a shortfall of about £180,000 for the year from garden waste. Within transport, the main area of underspend continues to be concessionary fares, where usage hasn't yet returned to pre-pandemic levels, and this ongoing saving is now anticipated. I think it's worth highlighting that as part of the budget that members agreed back in February, there was an expectation of savings from the former Place Directorate of £900,000, and savings equating to this number have been identified and budgets reduced at a recurring basis based on the decisions that Executive made back in September. From paragraph 24, you've got all the usual performance information that have been brought together from the business intelligence team. So it's over to you to consider the report, and we'll answer what questions we can. And if we can't answer any today, we'll get back to you in coming days.
Thank you, Patrick. And any members want to kick us off? Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it might be more one for James Gilchrist, but just on the 200,000 saving from street lighting, Patrick, can you remind me, was that by doing it cheaper, or was that by using the lights less? And then there's obviously a follow-up after that.
As you'll be aware, the energy prices have gone up and down quite considerably over the last couple of years. So pre the invasion of Ukraine, we were paying about 11p per unit for street lighting. That jumped up to 22p the following year, and then up to 33p in 23-24. So a tripling basically of the cost of energy. That's now come back down to about 17.5p. So we had built extra money into the budget to equate for the additional cost. We actually put to more than we needed to put in for street lighting. And once the bill started coming in this financial year, we're able to knock that back down again. So hope the budget should now be equating to the actual cost of street lighting this year.
Thank you. Go on, Councillor Stewart.
Yes, just sort of further, this might be a policy thing. Well, it is really, I suppose. How much is the amount of street lighting that we're paying for really set in stone, or how much is the council potentially looking to put certain lights on less, as other councils have done?
Scrutiny looked at this last year, I think, from memory. We brought a report on this, and as we alluded to at that time, that changing the hours of usage, whilst it might reduce the amount of energy used, it doesn't necessarily reduce the bill, because we're not on a metered supply, we're on an unmetered supply. And therefore the electricity supply companies, to a certain extent, set the charge they want, and it's through negotiation the bill we pay. So we have done some work, as was in the report that came previously. We did it with Sean Gibbons from an energy perspective, from memory. So we have looked at it. We don't think there are financial savings in it. There are potentially electricity usage savings in it, but there's obviously impacts for residents as well.
Thank you. I have a question which, again, you might be best placed to answer, James. It's about the road maintenance element of the report, which is touched on in paragraph or section 43. Obviously, the financial pressures of the council, and every council is under, is well known. But I was struck by what seems to be a material difference in performance in terms of roads in need of repair compared to other local authorities that we're benchmarking against. So what are we doing differently? Because I'm guessing there's places that, you know, have every single area is different. So there'll be similar areas, bigger areas, smaller areas, but they're fair gaps they are. So are we just trying to approach road maintenance in a different way to other local authorities?
No, I don't think so. I think the change year on year is a small difference, and as I think this has been a previous scrutiny topic as well that we've done work around. So maintenance is, without wanting to redo the scrutiny topic, the government through DfT give us a pot of money, and the council top that up with more than double what DfT give us for maintenance. And that's a long-standing sort of principle that York has adopted. Many councils don't do that. They only spend the money that that government give them. The way maintenance money is spent is pretty much in accordance with the best practice documents that exist, and that was previously approved at executive round about 3 years ago, I think, 2020, maybe 4 years ago. So we previously brought that, how we maintain highways, to executive, which is what we call the Highways Asset Management Plan and the Highway Inspection Manual. And they both sort of dictate the approach to both reactive maintenance, which is where we go out and inspect, or residents report things, and we do quick emergency repairs, alongside the asset management approach, which is the annual programme of more substantial repairs. And it's a combination of the two that give you the best balance of value for money.
I do appreciate that. I'm reading this thinking, I'm sure every other council and their relevant officers would say something similar to that. So if the percentage of non-principal roads in York where maintenance should be considered is 25%, but the national average is 6% and regional average is 3%, that I'm not disregarding what you've said there, because there's obviously a methodical approach and it's in line with best practice, but why are others doing better, like considerably better, going off that?
The honest answer is I don't know. We'd need to go away and do a piece of work around how they are achieving that, whether that is because they've got a better base, whether their condition historically is better. I genuinely don't know. I couldn't speak for those other authorities, obviously, and I don't think we've ever done it in that way.
Okay, well, appreciate your honesty. Something maybe to look into. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for this report. Point 31 on page 19, we talk about the percentage of vacant city centre shops. Obviously, the city centre very important for our centre of the economy. But also it talks about comparing it to York more widely. Of course, there are shops all across York and some of them may or may not be vacant. It sort of talks about how the York figures have remained relatively stable. And the centre is experiencing higher vacancy levels than the average. So I wonder if you could go into a bit more detail around that, about how many vacant shops there are outside of the city centre, and in terms of the stability there, whether that is consistent across the rest of the city, or whether there are key hotspots where there may be more vacancies than others.
I think, to be fair, Councillor Whitcroft, the expertise in this area is not in the room this evening, so we would have to take that back to our combination of our economic growth team stroke the property team as to getting that level of detail. I think it is fair to say that York is doing significantly better than regional comparators and probably most national comparators. York does remain a strong destiny. There is still strong demand for retail premises in a number of streets, but I think all members know about the difficulties that are faced by the retail sector at the moment. So in terms of getting that wider information, I'll see what I can get around the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. One on page 16, the line on fleets and the variance there. Is that related to waste vehicles, or is that or are waste vehicles included in the waste line? So I just wondered what the the underlying reason behind this variance in fleet was. And the second point on page 35, there's stats we've had for some time in terms of missed waste collections. I just wondered if that will be affected by, I think there's a change in policy whereby missed bins won't be collected in certain circumstances. So I wondered whether the measurement was still consistent in terms of if there's been a change in policy, whether the reporting would need to change. But just a couple of points.
Yeah, sure. Certainly on the fleet line. So this is effectively the transport team who administer the fleet on behalf of other departments. And so it's the sort of the cost of insurance, the cost of licensing, taxation, and so on and so forth. So I think at Monitor One, certainly insurance costs have gone up by more than they were expecting. I'm doing a review at the moment to try and charge those back out to the services where they should go. So I think it's just a case of they're sitting within the fleet line at the beginning of the year, and now we need to charge them out to the correct department. So I would expect that overspend to go as we move through the year. And with regards, Miss Binns, I'll leave that to James.
Yeah, so I think your question was, have we changed the way of measuring in light of the policy change or not? And I'm going to again say I need to double check before I answer. I think we have reflected the new policy, but I want to double check that before I commit to that. So I'll come back to the committee with that in writing.
Thank you. Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, this might be a stupid question. Probably is. Planning services, obviously a very small number. I just wanted to ask, what does that involve at £39,000? Clearly not planning as a department. I just wanted to check what it was essentially.
Yeah, well, it's effectively the net cost of planning services. So it's development control, building services, land charges, and environmental management and heritage and conservation. The vast majority of planning comes back in fees. So actually the net cost to the council is relatively small. It's important to say that these exclude recharges. So this is just the cost of the direct planning team. When you do include the wider cost of planning, so business support, which sits in customer services, have a number of staff who do the planning application sort of documentation at the beginning of it, aren't included in these numbers. And so it's later in the year when we incorporate recharges, the numbers do get a bit higher, but yeah, it is just the planning services.
Councillor Stewart.
It's just a supplementary. It just got me thinking, given the council's now very optimistic, the local plan is now imminent to be signed off. And obviously we've had lots of years where it hasn't been, and therefore we've had higher costs with the local plan team. If we get the local plan signed off, in the next sort of few months, how much is that, do you think, going to be worth to the actual budget in terms of, not having resources in terms of developing the plan, but also planning application fees and everything like that? It must be quite a figure.
In terms of the local plan team itself, we've actually got a relatively small local plan team. The council has put in quite considerable one-off sums to support these. Yeah, that was all funded from one-off, so there wasn't recurring budget for those areas. So the fact that we no longer have those QCs isn't creating a saving to the council per se going forward. But you're absolutely right that at some point we do expect a pipeline of applications to come through, and we will presumably get significant fees, but it all comes down to the timing, which we're not in control of, when those developments will come forward.
I have a supplementary from Councillor Healy, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Merritt.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of information. When we were doing the interviews for the new Director of City Strategy, there was an expectation that we'd have to refund the local plan team, and it would actually get bigger, because there is a feeling that we're literally going to finish this local plan and then have to straight go into another one. So whereas it has been declining in cost over the years, we're expecting it to get back up again.
Thank you for that, Councillor Healy. Try and keep things to questions if we can, although your input is appreciated. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, on the scorecard, the figures for the median pay gap, gender pay gap, are, as they have been in previous years, rather all over the place. Do we understand why that is? What we're actually seeing in these figures?
Sorry, Councillor Mayor, I probably have to refer to my previous answer. I'd need some of the officers with the expertise rather than myself on that one.
I'll await the answer. Second issue, coming back to one of the issues the public speaker raised, and that's the impact of potholes and ridging and so on cyclist safety. I know over the years, under the pressure of the reducing funding for local government, we've in effect accepted larger, deeper potholes in terms of your intervention standard. What evidence is there in terms of what impact that is having on cyclist safety? I must admit, personally, I certainly share the concern about the situation on the roads at night.
So your memory is better than mine, but I don't think in the 7 years I've been here, the intervention level has changed. So it's probably pre that. I'm not sure we collect data in that way at the moment. I'll go away and talk to the team, but I don't think we produce a KPI that would give us that information. Whether we hold the data and can interpret it in that way, I would need to go away and look at in all honesty, Councillor Merritt.
And can I also ask specifically about the significant change in the figures on unclassified roads between the 2 years figures? So that's a very big difference.
Yeah, well, on page 35, see the new glasses SO7. Is that the KPI you're looking at?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, again, I need to go away and look at that to understand the difference. Part of the national best practice that we follow is about looking at the levels of usage of the network. So those bits of the network that have the highest speeds and are most used are the ones where the guidance tells us road condition is the highest priority. So unclassified roads would, on that basis, tend to be a lower priority than A roads, for instance.
Yes, but that's always been the case, in my opinion. Sorry, that relative prioritisation has always been the case.
Yes, but the longer that goes on, the further the unclassified roads will get by logic.
Yeah, thank you. Any further questions, colleagues? No, okay. Well, in that case, I'd like to say thank you to the officers and Patrick for this report. Thanks for stepping in as well, James. And you know, once again, credit to the officers for doing what they can under these nightmare financial pressures. Yeah, there's no other way to put it, in my opinion. So yeah, we'll move on to the next item. Flicking between screens again, but I believe it's the report that's looking at the a review of the city centre access following the restoration of blue badge access and all the, well, it was very well publicised. It went on for quite a while, and we are now around roughly a year on, are we, from the first bit of access being restored? Obviously we can take the paper as read, but if we can get a brief summary before we get into questions, it'd be appreciated. Is this just you, James?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's almost exactly a year since the executive made the decision to reinstate access. As you remember, there was a consultation before that executive to set a number of principles, as one of the public speakers spoke about, in terms of how public access should be reinstated. So that decision was made in October last year, and the decision was made to implement it in January after the Christmas markets. So that has happened. Blue badge access has been reinstated, and we've facilitated that through various sort of iterations of rolling out the HVM bollard system, the last of which is currently in build at the moment. I think one of the questions that was asked in preparing this paper was about issues with those systems. So I'm only aware of one particular issue where the bollard a couple of weeks ago got stuck in the closed position. But we do have maintenance and call out arrangements for that. So that was fixed the next day and back operational. I think there are lessons we've learned from that about how we facilitate access when those things do happen, and there are improvements we are making to people who are in, how they can get out and navigate through the city, but also how we route people when those systems do go down to the other location to gain access. Apart from that, I think everything else is pretty much in the report. I think the only thing I really wanted to sort of just that I probably could have added to the report and isn't strong enough is the links to the local transport strategy. Obviously, last time you looked at the implementation plan, and that had a whole series of actions around further improvements to the accessibility of the city centre and indeed the city. And that obviously sits alongside these changes that were made a year ago.
Thank you, James. I mean, there will be elements to discuss, but I think generally speaking, well, speaking as a councillor, I think it's been a huge positive that access has been restored. And you know, fair play to the executive for delivering on that. I'm sure we'll all have more to say. I mean, I do have one question though around sort of future provision of access and using technology, such as showing a blue badge to a camera. I think it's what one of the public speakers raised as a concern that won't work for all blue badge holders. It says there's further work that's required around this. So what more further work will be done in that respect to make sure that anyone with a blue badge can get in and isn't sort of accidentally shut out because a future solution doesn't work for all?
So no decisions have been made about future operation of the system, just to reassure. If we, and you know, we'll be honest, it's an opportunity always to review how we do everything. And I think it'd be wrong to say that anything the council does is cast in stone and never be reviewed. But as you know, we would be doing that through co-design and working with blue badge holders to understand what does and doesn't work for blue badge holders and how the access can be best provided. So working through those, what are the impacts of any change to the way it happens? And I think actually we've got a session with York Access Forum to discuss exactly that point in the next week or so, to discuss those sort of principles.
Thank you. Would it be right to say then that the pressure behind changing how access is sort of given is financial? So rather than have staff being paid wages stood there, you know, the council would save money by using technology instead. Is that what's pushing it that way?
It's partly a budgetary, but it's also about efficiency and making best use of the resources we've got. So is that the best way is there a better way to create access? It was the quickest way to do it when we made a decision in October, and we wanted a solution as soon as possible in January. So a staffed solution was absolutely the right thing to do at that point in time. Reviewing how we do it, is there a better way to do it? It's just part of good management. I'm not saying there's an outcome to that process, but it's right that we review it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Colleagues, Councillor Hook.
Sort of a follow-up, because I'm thinking like there are plans afoot to close the centre of York to traffic, but leave it open obviously for emergency vehicles and blue badge holders. So we need to get an answer so that we get the access for that as well. So are you thinking of the two together?
Sorry, I'm slightly...
Closing Rougier Street and Ouse Bridge and things like that. That was in the plans. So you need to therefore get a way of quickly letting blue badge holders get through as well.
Yeah, so that scheme is very early in its formulation. I don't think we know exactly what the measures will be, other than there is a way to reduce traffic through that corridor. I don't think we've determined anything beyond the fact that there is something for us to look at there. But yes, if we find a solution that works for blue badge holders, then obviously that could be rolled out elsewhere potentially.
Thank you, councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. Following on from the point around looking at the operation of the current measures and with a view to potentially achieving cost savings. Are you looking at in the context of other sort of related schemes such as the dial-in ride scheme, which colleagues and I did quite a lot of work on, as part of the same piece in terms of accessibility? There may be potential to reduce costs in one area in order to release funds to support a replacement service. Or are you looking at it through that kind of prism, or do you see community transport as a separate entity? And then just a quick question around the report references impending consultation on developing an anti-terrorism traffic regulation order. It'd be helpful to understand what implications that might have for what currently exists. Thank you.
So the consultation we've done with blue badge holders, they have told us clearly that whilst dial ride is a valued service, it's not necessarily the solution to blue badge access. So I think we've got to see them as complementary, not either or. And I think that's a message that's come through loud and clear. Access is more nuanced than one solution, though, and I completely accept that. And I think the implementation plan that you saw at the last meeting shows that it is more nuanced than just a single solution. How any budget is spent is obviously a member decision, and I don't think we would go, therefore, that gives you an opportunity to do that. So it's not viewed in that tighter way. It would be for executive and ultimately full council to determine how the budget is set. Sorry, on the anti-terror TRO, I didn't realise there was a second bit. So this was detailed in the October report last year. An anti-terror traffic regulation order is something that exists like a traffic regulation order, but isn't used for the vast majority of the time. And the police can instigate it to put in controls. So we actually used one when the now King visited York not long ago to create a safe space for that visit. We are still talking to the police about this, but an anti-terror TRO would likely give the police the ability to operate the barriers if they were aware of some intelligence or an unplanned or very short notice event like a protest. They could potentially go, actually, do you know what? Because of information we've got, we think the safest thing for the city to do is to do that, and it would be for short-term type arrangements. So that's what ATROs are used for. They are primarily a police instigated tool in response to intelligence or short notice, and they are used in other cities around the country.
Yes, sure.
So if they exist and have been used and the police can use them, how would this order differ? Would it enshrine something at kind of a system level in terms of the police would have access to or control over systems that currently they can access through requesting that the council closes a barrier or whatever? So I'm trying to understand what exactly would be consulted on.
So it would be, the previous ones have been a short-term TRO for an event. I might need Helen to come and help me on before I get out of my depth in the legalities of this. But the proposed ATRO would be there all the time and allow the police to operate it. The one for the visit of the now King was a short-term one for a specific event. This will be one that directly related to the HVM measures and would allow the police to go, I don't know, we had civil unrest in other cities around the country a few months ago. If there'd been specific intelligence about something in York, they might have gone at that point, you know what, we want to make the city centre as secure as possible because we are concerned about a potential bit of unrest or demonstration, etc.
Thank you. Next on my list, I've got Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for this report. Echo the Chair's comments around how we think it's been a really positive change for the city. The public speaker obviously raised questions around the Christmas market, and obviously that comes under Principle 2. In fact, it's specifically mentioned in Principle 2 as the time when the situation has changed so that access needs to no longer be there. I understand that that was the case because the contractual arrangements for the Christmas market take place so early on that eventually that the agreement has to be put in place. I just don't know whether there's any scope or suggestion that this might be reviewed in coming years.
Yes, so I mean, whilst I think Councillor Revilius might want to come forward, but I think we have been clear that our aspiration is that it is reviewed going forward. But the organisation of the Christmas market is a bit like painting the Forth Road Bridge. Literally on New Year's Day, they start planning the next one. So it was just time was so up against us. But I think there's absolutely an intention that we try our best to make sure Blue Badge access happens in the future.
Is that a supplementary, Councillor Jane Burton, or? Okay, thank you. Appreciate your honesty. I'll put you on the proper list. Next I've got Councillor Healy. Okay, thanks. Councillor Jane Burton.
I've got a few questions actually. One issue is, you know, with this ANPR or showing the blue badge, there are difficulties there for people who don't have limbs, for instance. So it's not possible for them to show their badge. And one of the issues with the bollards is that they were designed so that if you want to call somebody to get entry, you have to get out of your car because the call point is on the passenger side. So if you're on your own in your car and you don't have a long enough walking stick to press the button, for instance, out of your window, which isn't ideal, you're a bit stuck, to say the least. So is there a chance that you could redesign or that they could be converted in some way to bring the that access speaker, whatever you'd call it, to the other side of the road again?
So, as I say, it's a principles discussion at the moment. So the very point we're at the moment is if we were to go down a different route, how would it work and what would be needed? So I don't think we are going, it would necessarily be as it is now. It's absolutely a discussion to go, could this in any event work? So could the driver show the blue badge? And I appreciate some drivers have adapted vehicles that are very different, but in the main that would catch the vast majority. We need to understand that, and that's why we want to talk to people to understand what is and what wouldn't work. So I don't think we've got any preconceived ideas about how it would work. The very point of engaging is to understand how it could possibly work, if at all.
And what worries me in this is that knowing also that the amount of consultations that I've personally attended is, I don't know how many more consultations can happen to get a solution to this, because I think it's been going on for quite a long time. There's a terrible amount of frustration at the moment about the situation with the Christmas market. There's been, compromises suggested, such as, could we go in at least until the early, in November and December, the early parts of the month, during the week rather than at weekends when it is less busy, because it's not just about Christmas market and shopping. There are people's dentists, their hairdressers, their opticians. People, when the barriers were closed, people lost money because they couldn't get in because they had appointments that were already paid for. So it's highly inconveniencing people within the city.
So I think there's 2 points in there. So the first one about consultation, I appreciate that the consultation that has happened so far hasn't necessarily resolved this. So part of MEMA's commission was to look at this, and that report came to executive in September. I think my memory is playing tricks with me, but I'm pretty sure it was September. And they didn't reach a conclusion on, they identified some issues, but didn't really nail it. So that's why we want to pick it up a little bit further. In terms of the access during the Christmas market, that is something that we have looked at. We've spoken to counter-terrorism police in North East to try and find a way to facilitate access. And one of the suggestions we shared with them was that could Foot Street hours start at lunchtime, for instance, to try and facilitate that access. And that was something they weren't supportive of. And we showed them footfall data. We gave them everything we could to try and make that happen. And they weren't supportive of that position. And that's not underestimating the impact, which I do get.
Yeah, I mean, that was the situation, wasn't it, anyway, because the previous administration were advised to close the foot streets. This administration decided to open them. And so far, thank goodness, there have been no incidents. I mean, what made me think also was you've got the temporary order when the King visited and he got eggs thrown at him. You can't stop anything really happening of that sort of nature. You know, no one wants a terrorist incident to happen, certainly disabled drivers or anybody else. But we can't, I just don't think we can I mean, we wouldn't go out of the front door on a morning, would we? We'd just all stay at home to avoid risk. So their attitude to risk is slightly different to the one that we've adopted within the city.
Councillor Aurelius?
Just thought it might be useful if I come in terms of, I think the challenge here is that the risk changes with the Christmas market because it is busier. And so as an executive and administration, we accepted we'll go against what we're being advised throughout the majority of the year, but we have to accept that that risk has increased or is thought to have increased during the Christmas market. And part of that is the way the Christmas market is arranged results in heavy crowding, even along the current Blue Badge access routes. So what we recognise is we feel next year there's absolutely opportunity to get in there early and make sure that the way the market is designed reduces the risk and reduces the level of crowding along those routes so that we can facilitate access. But to do it this year, we've really explored so many different possible permutations and have to take that risk seriously for everybody's sake. And we're as frustrated as everybody out there that we can't find a solution to work this year. We are still actively looking at if there are any possible ways of achieving this. It's we're not resting on this. But it is, we have to acknowledge that the risk is different at Christmas time and recognise that in other cities, that's when these awful terrorist attacks have happened because there are large crowds there. So it's really difficult. And I'm sorry, I can't, and just to reassure, we are still actively looking for solutions.
Thank you. I'll bring in Councillor Merritt now. He's been very patient. Councillor Burton, if you have more questions, we can come back to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that was really helpful, Kate, in terms of explaining the nature of the, and James, in terms of the nature of the problem that we've got here. So perhaps the first question out of that is, are we actually going to do some detailed monitoring of what the volumes of people are at different times of day and different days of the week over this Christmas market to understand where there might be potential for doing something different next time? And I suppose the other issue is, and understand the police are coming from the point of view of trying to minimise the risks, but do they also not have a responsibility to ensure that all sections of the population, in the same way as we do have access? So I hope they are being, they are seriously looking at how they could help to find a way to help us resolve this challenge, so that all our residents and visitors do have the opportunity to get into the city centre during this period. 'Cause 5 weeks is a long time. If you need to go to services that are city centre based, that's a long time to not be able to do so.
Response?
So we collect footfall data now. That's not that nuanced, I think it's fair to say, in terms of the collection points.
Yeah.
I will certainly look at whether we can collect some more detailed footfall data around those blue badge access points. So yeah, we can certainly look at that.
But I have a supplementary from Councillor Healy.
Chair. So picking up on what Councillor Merritt has just said and yourselves, can you just give us some idea about how much busier footfall is during the Christmas market than other times? Like, I don't know, Jorvik Festival is very busy, Food Festival is very busy, just other busy times. And second part would be, is the intention to redesign the Christmas market to bring the footfall figures down to a threshold similar to what we have on other busy weekends in order to allow blue badge access?
Can you talk about the second bit?
Yeah. So, I think in terms of how we have to redesign the layout of the Christmas market, it's a matter of working with the counter-terrorism police, with Make It York, and looking at how can we spread it out. It's not necessarily about making it a smaller market. What opportunities are there? Could we have some of it on Micklegate? Could we have some of it on the Castle car park? What other spaces have we got to spread into, so that we don't have to concentrate people in quite the same way as we do currently, and so that we can enable access for absolutely everybody. But I couldn't possibly say what the solutions will be, because that is going to be something we have to take into account, all the evidence that we have and all the expertise from those different agencies and organisations. But we think, or we are confident, that it's going to be possible, it is possible to organise something. And yes, there's always that balance about how big is the Christmas market, how much footfall does it bring, how profitable is it for the city, and how, are we prepared to shrink it a bit in order to enable access? That'll be a question that comes up if it needs to, or whether we spill it into other areas, make it work in a different way. That's all to be worked out, I think. Yeah. And the other half of it was the difference in footfall, isn't it?
Yeah, and I can't get that off. I'll need to come back to you on that. I can't find it off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Thank you for trying to give me time.
I mean, my understanding is the footfall is significantly more at Christmas, and it's also about the status of the event in terms of a terrorism threat. You see it in other cities. It's a high status event. It's very well advertised. It's not, it's obviously the footfall makes it a high status event, but it's also a high status event in its own right.
It's a very fair question now, Councillor Healy, because it does imply that there's someone draws a line somewhere that number's too many. And that then undermines this being about an issue of principle and access. And so it would be useful to get a sense as to how Christmas is approached compared to non-Christmas events that are also busy elsewhere in the calendar year, which are deemed fine. Something to come back to. Councillor Stewart, was that a supplementary? Yeah, okay, then go on then. I'll come to you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just to add to the sort of flow of comments. And obviously, it's a long period of time, isn't it? We're excluding blue badge holders, and I think that is a shame. And obviously, but it was the point about the Christmas market. I understand, obviously, all the sort of issues you're weighing up. do think as a city, we dismiss the idea of spreading things like the Christmas market around far too readily.
Yeah.
You know, I was at something a while ago where I said, oh, and we certainly will not be doing what I think, you know, I can't remember which city they cited, where it's spread around the city. And I've been to the cities where a Christmas market has been spread around. You know, Leeds has done stuff. Montreux went a few years ago to give a really exotic sort of place, and they were both spread, and they were vastly better, incomparably better to York's, where it's all crammed in to one place. And I think I've probably been to York Christmas market once in a decade or something like that, and that's just for the novelty of it's in York and go along. But I have no idea why people want to go to it, because it's so rammed in, it's so finite, and we've got all these areas. You know, you mentioned Micklegate and the sort of Castle car park, and one of the areas that, you know, I sort of think is I can't remember what it's called, opposite Aviva. If you go from Aviva to the river, and there's like a little area of grass, you know, with a couple of benches next to the hotel. Yeah, North Street, yeah. That sort of area, it's not used for anything at all, but you know, if you had, and there is the such and such section of the Christmas market, that's the food section. In there, you can have, you know, lots and lots of stalls. It'd work far better. So I think we've got a crazy situation where we've got this complication with the blue badge holders. And despite that, we're still wedded to our, let's ram everyone into Parliament Street. Whereas I just think passionately that the Christmas market worked far better for everybody in York if we had it more spread out for visitors and everything like that. And I think we as a council should continue, you know, should look more at that. You know, would anybody agree, I suppose?
Glad you turned that into a question at the very end.
So just briefly answer that. That question is yes. And I think we should maybe view it as an opportunity. Next year we can do something so much better that will be an enhanced experience for everybody and accessible for everybody. So maybe this is something we can work cross-party on, really, you know, devising something that's a lot better, and I'd welcome that. Yeah.
James?
I've found the figures at last. Just roughly from a summer peak, so a week in August we've picked, compared to Christmas, it's 50% more in terms of footfall. So you're half as much again for Christmas as you are in an August weekend. But it, just to stress, it's not just a numbers game, it is the risk profile of a Christmas market attracts and have been targeted. And that's the evidence from Europe. And you saw the EU last year coming out saying Christmas markets are a particular target.
Yeah, fully appreciated that. Understood it the first time as well, but thanks for giving the figures, James. I've got a mini list here: Councillor Fenton, then Councillor Jane Burton. Okay.
Thank you. Just sort of following on. I know in the past, various meetings at various stages, we've had access to advice from the counter-terrorism officers, not in terms of the confidential briefing, but the sort of headline advice. I'm guessing decisions around the Christmas market have been informed by Safety Advisory Group, which I'm guessing is normally where decisions around major events would go to. Would it be possible for the Safety Advisory Group's advice to be shared with members of this committee, I suppose, to help us get an understanding of, someone mentioned the kind of threshold, what the advice was in terms of the risk balanced against the access considerations.
So Safety Advisory Group gives advice, doesn't make decisions, just to be clear. And it's made up of a series of stakeholders. I can certainly go back and talk to the monitoring officer about where those minutes can be shared. So yeah, I'll go in and ask that question.
That would be helpful. Thank you. Councillor Jane Burton.
I just wanted to agree with Councillor Stewart, but wholeheartedly, about spreading out the markets. And I've had the good fortune to have lived in Germany and Switzerland and France and been to some tremendously good Christmas markets that were spread out throughout the town. And I mean, there have been videos of the Christmas market in York, which is absolutely dangerously stuffed with people, and never mind a terrorist attack. If somebody fell in the middle of some of these crowd scenes, it would be an awful stampede. And heaven forbid we should be, you know, just for the sake of making more and more money. You know, I think it's incredibly dangerous, and I take on board what you've said about the Christmas market situation. So thank you for answering that question. And I do question also this Ferris wheel, which is going round and round, and how environmentally friendly it is, and how much space it's taking up. You know, you could spread out a bit over there too. I just, you know, it's spoiling the pavements. And then my last part is about mitigations, and I will have a question. I'm getting quite good. I'm taking tips of because I'm learning, watching and learning. But mitigations and the seating that was promised in the Martin Higgitt report, which is several years ago, we still haven't got any seating. We used to have really great seating in York. There was seating all over Parliament Street, all over Sampson Square, all over the place. It's all been taken out, and we got more and more people coming. Hardly anywhere to go. I know that there's the take a seat in a shop situation, but we've got problems. We haven't got enough toilets. We haven't got enough seating. We've surely got to plan for all of this better. You know, mitigations for disabled people, yes, but for everyone, to make it more pleasant and not to be so pressured and so rammed in, and to bring back a bit of the glory of this city, so you can sit and appreciate it. So the question was about when will we have the seating?
So a couple of points, I think, to just pick up. So last year's Christmas market was significantly busier than the one before, but actually didn't feel it because of the way the Make It York had changed the way the stalls were laid out. So they actually they recognised that challenge of the 2022 Christmas market and did change the layout of stalls and their market stalls to try and mitigate that. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think if Make It York were here, they would talk about that. So I think it's only fair that I mention that. There is a live project to do seating improvements within the city centre. I think the project is semi on hold, and I'm looking behind me at David, but I think we are trialling some new seating at Acomb Front Street, which, if it works, will then be rolled out to the city centre.
Right, and we've actually got now in Gardens as well.
So that's we had a thumbs up and a supportive comment from the officer who was off mic. No, you're fine. Thank you, David. Well, covered a fair bit of ground there. I mean, I think there's scope here for at least a couple of recommendations. I think the first one should be, and completely appreciate that this is the appetite already, Councillor Avilius, but I think we should have a recommendation that the executive member does everything within their ability, authority to review how the market is laid out at Christmas, so we can facilitate blue badge access, and obviously that involves working with Make It York and the police. But this conversation has come up and it's come and gone over the years, even before blue badge access was restricted, and there has been a historical reluctance, I think, from Make It York to spread it out across the city. And frankly, I don't care if it's not as busy. If it's better for residents, it's still going to be busy. It doesn't have to be chock-a-block. Anyway, don't think that needs minuting. Good luck trying. But Councillor Villiers, you wanted to say something to that?
Just want to. So firstly, I'll be working together with Councillor Pete Kilbane on that one, because it's transport and it's economy. But no problem to work together. And the caveat here is we will, of course, have to keep considering terrorism advice, and hostile vehicle measures enclose a particular area. They don't enclose the other areas that we've talked about. So there will be serious consideration and discussion, and possibly, you know, it's not going to be simple to just spread it out, because the whole point of having those hostile vehicle measures is to keep people safe who are visiting the city centre. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just adding in the note of caution about we can't just suddenly say, well, we'll expand the Christmas market.
With respect, Councillor Villiers, I'm very aware that it's not simple, but this problem keeps coming up, and it does need attention. And I think it's almost on the responsible authorities to say why Blue Badge access cannot get into the city centre or be allowed for the city centre over Christmas time. And that question hasn't been properly answered. And, you know, and until we look at all configurations of the market and what it could be, you know, we're not going to have peace on this question. I'm not saying it's simple, but not enough work's being done on it.
So what I'm trying to say is absolutely committed to ensuring we have Blue Badge access, and we facilitate that via thinking about how the market's designed. What I can't promise is that we can expand the market to outside of the hostile vehicle measures, because I literally don't know. And so it's about what the expectation is here. But yeah, we're absolutely committed to working together with Make It York and the counter-terrorism police to put in place next year a solution that welcomes absolutely everybody to the city centre during that period.
Councillor Knight and then Councillor Merritt.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I'm trying to formulate a question here. Would the executive member be prepared to consider that in expanding the market across the area, we are then giving accessibility and access to people with neurodiverse conditions, because the market is totally a no-go for anyone with mental health issues and other neurodiverse issues. So I think it's not just about the Blue Badge access, it's about access. And I'm very conscious that that's never, doesn't appear to have ever been discussed, but if we spread it out, it suddenly becomes accessible for more.
So yeah, very good point, Councillor Knight. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a really good point. I have every desire to spread the market out, to not have it as concentrated as it is. I just wanted to flag up that there will then be a different kind of terrorism risk associated with having market outside of the hostile vehicle measures. So it's just going to have to be considered within it, and whether we'll be able to achieve exactly what we want or not, I don't know. But we will be working to achieve the access for everybody to the whole city centre.
I've got Councillor Merritt first. Was that a supplementary? Oh, sorry.
Is that right? Thank you. To reassure you, so I can't, I'm visually impaired, so I can't see all your faces. You're all blurry, so you can make all the faces you like. To reassure you on the neurodiversity thing, we've been working with St Sampson Centre for the last year on a year and a half. And this year is going to be the first year we're trialling them to be, we don't want to use the word safe space because that also has negative connotations, but a kind of an oasis of peace and calm. So Rama and Richard, who manage and run the St Sampson Centre, us, them, and Make It York have provided some basic funding to help improve some of the accessibility of the venue, and they are going to be promoted in this year's marketing for the Christmas market as somewhere to go to get away from the hustle and bustle of the market itself. Obviously it's right opposite Silver Street toilets as well, so if you need to use the changing places or the accessible toilet, you can go there. They have 4 accessible toilets themselves and 2 public accessible toilets for customers. So we're going to be raising the profile of St Sampson Centre for exactly that reason, because that was feedback that we got in my first Christmas that I was here, was it was overwhelming for people with neurodiversity. I mean, my daughter, she wouldn't be seen dead at the Christmas market at this present moment in time because she wouldn't be able to cope with that. So hopefully that will give you a bit of reassurance. This is the first year we're trialing it. We'll then start getting feedback from people who've used it for that purpose to help improve that again for next year. Thank you.
Thank you for that, David. I think Councillor Merritt, sorry if I've got my order wrong, but let's try and keep this on recommendations, as you know, I want to keep the agenda moving. We were very, very late last time.
Yes,
Councillor Merritt.
Apologies, it was more to pick up the issue about dispersal versus concentration, because if you think laterally about it, actually dispersing the market will disperse people to a degree. And actually some of those spaces, you know, North Street Gardens is behind a incredibly robust football So you're not going to be getting vehicles getting in there. You know, the use of temporary barriers, which we've seen around the country, you know, these big heavy things that they drop in place, you know, you may be able to protect other areas. And the reality is we aren't going to protect all areas. You know, people have to get to the city centre. So there are hordes of people on some of the roads from the station, from some of the major car parks and all the rest of it, which are not defended. And in practical terms, probably never will. So, you know, I think that there are choices and trade-offs in this. It's not an absolute thing. I think, but with a reasonable will and wish to solve both the access problem and maximise security, I'm sure we can do something different than what we're doing at the moment. And I hope the executive member might be, and Mr. Gilchrist may be willing to take that away, which is my question.
Just about a question. I mean, unless there's a response wanting to be made, I think the point is heard, Councillor Merritt. Did anyone else have thoughts on recommendations? Or Councillor Burton, you had a hand before, forgive me. Okay, any other recommendations on this item? I mean, you know, for as much as we've got into some detail here, I don't want it to be lost that the overall change is absolutely positive. And, you know, I think we've probably all heard from residents who've been hugely positively benefited by what the council have done in trying to put things right. But there's clearly still important details that need work. I imagine it will come back again to this committee in a year, possibly with an extra focus on the Christmas market, maybe less than a year actually. So we could maybe find out what you're doing ahead of Christmas 2025. But anyway, I'll bring this item to a close and have a quick refreshment break, if that's okay, everybody, just for no more than 10 minutes tops. We'll start again at 6:58 sharp. All good. Thank you. Okay, so welcome back to tonight's Economy, Place, Access and Transport Scrutiny Committee. The next item of business is looking at the whole broadband installation process that's gone on across the city and its impact on communities. This was actually raised during our work planning process, not this year, the year before, I think, by Councillor Nelson, who was on the committee back then. But I think it's something that a lot of us have probably touched as ward councillors. So it just be, well, we wanted a report to sort of get into that and to see if there's any ways that it can be made better for the communities that are receiving the works, even though I think most of us, if not all of us, accept that it's a good thing that we have this high-speed internet being rolled out across the city. We have a bit of a crowd at the bottom of the table. Who's going to do a brief summary of the report, and then we'll jump into questions.
I will do a very brief introduction and hand over to Helen, who has done the vast majority of the work, so I don't want to steal her thunder or her pain. So I suppose the council shares two objectives in this, one of which is broadband rollout, which there's huge benefit to, but also recognising the challenges that rollout brings in terms of the impact it has in terms of the increase in street works. So there's two sort of sides to this. Myself and Helen focus on that second bit about how we manage that disruption. I think the key thing which Helen will talk about is the way we've changed that process with the permit system, which has given us much more ability to control and limit that, and also hold the contractors to account in the way we previously couldn't. So I'll hand over to Helen.
Thank you.
So really an overview, I'm guessing we'll address specific points and questions. One of the teams I manage is the street works team, and this is how we manage how utilities dig up our roads and streets and pavement. And so about a third of the permits that we issue for utilities to go and do some works on our streets are telecoms permits. We issue about 9,000 permits a year. So that's about, I got some stats from the team before coming here. So that's about, if we count in days for which they have a permit to be on the street, telecommunications is 3,100 days a year. So they are a big, big customer for us. And the way we manage it is the team has a duty to coordinate. So the team looks at everybody who's applying to work on the streets and looks at whether there's going to be clashes. Is somebody asking to work on a route that's already a diversion route for somebody else, all these type of things. And then they also check the works as they are taking place to make sure it's safe, it's accessible, people can get around the works in a safe way. And then they also check the works after the utilities have been, to check that the reinstatements are done correctly. And if it's not done correctly, we can call the utilities back to repair. So that's the main process really. In terms of consultation, communication with residents, all of these things, there's national guidance, but it's all the utility has to do that. The council doesn't do it unless it's our own road works. Yeah, we've seen obviously a lot of works in York, and we're still seeing a lot of works in York for telecoms. The digital city team is working with some of the providers to fill some of the gaps, some areas that are not served yet. So in the report at paragraph 11, that's listed in terms of the government programs that we've been able to get money from or bid for funding. Any questions?
Thank you. Blimey, it's the most excitement we've had all evening. I'll try and I won't get the order right. Councillor Whitcroft, you were one. So let me get the whole list. Who else had the hand up? Councillor Merrick, Councillor Hook, Councillor Ben Burton, Councillor Stephen Benson, Councillor Jane Betts. As we always say, questions, not speeches, please, colleagues. Fire away, Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I'm aware. We're all aware of these problems specifically, and And I know that in my ward in particular, there are some areas where there's just better broadband and better Wi-Fi connection than others. I just wanted to know if there was any sort of plans so far about how we would prioritise the implementation in different areas of the city, if there's any data that we've used to try and understand which areas perhaps are the worst and need help first, or perhaps it's the case of which is the easiest area to access. Perhaps it's just the case of making sure that the street works are as minimal affected as possible. I just want to know about sort of the priority of implementation across the city, not necessarily on a ward by ward basis, but if there are any spots that we've identified so far, if we've got to that stage yet.
So the rollout isn't necessarily controlled by the council, so it's a commercial decision to roll out. Those areas where connectivity is poorest is probably because they are difficult builds. So concrete roads are a good example. If you've got a concrete road where they are more difficult to do if there isn't grass verges, or so there are some locations which are more difficult. Private roads are also more difficult because they need permissions, etc. So some of the funding bits of rollout that are mentioned in the report at paragraph 11 and 12, I think it is, are exactly the government are trying to push that those should be addressed so that there is equity across the piece. But Helen and I are probably not best placed to add much more than that, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt?
Yeah, I was just wondering, trying to get some sense of the scale of what we're facing. I mean, you know, rollout of telecom stuff has been going on now for what, 25 years. How much of, you know, how much of our properties now have full fibre? What's actually left to do? Just get some sense and what sort of likely timescales for that. Second question, does the abandonment of copper by BT in terms of traditional telephony, does that have any implications for some further round of removal, or in effect is everything that's in the ground just going to be abandoned? What's the implications of that part of the picture? And how do we feel that the Street Works Act is working in terms of trees? I mean, when this first started 25 years ago, we had terrible problems with contractors basically just slicing through all the tree roots, destroying dozens and hundreds of trees. Is that now a problem of the past, or is that still an issue? So it's a slightly diverse set of questions.
Yeah, the question on how many properties, I don't know, to be fair. It would be for the Digital City team to tell us, but they're not here tonight, so we'll have to take that away and come back. Implication of abandoning copper, I don't know either. In terms of rollout, we know that there are more providers who want to come to York. You know, we get approached regularly. Obviously, all these discussions tend to be confidential because it's their plans that they want to roll out. We also know that some providers want to upgrade. You know, there's always, everybody's streaming more, everybody's working from home, so there's always upgrades needed. A slight positive note, I guess, is the obligation for BT to share, well, Openreach, they're called, to share their network, which means that some of these upgrades can be done without additional digging, that they can use existing cables and ducting. So that is positive, but not everybody wants to share. So, and they have a right, if they decide not to share, they have a right to go and dig up the highway again. In terms of trees and the New Road and Street Works Act, I think the difference between what happened several years ago and now is the permit scheme, really. The permit scheme has enabled us to fund a lot more inspectors. So we now have a total of 5 full-time inspectors, and that means that every site gets inspected when it's live, which means that if somebody has cut some roots or if they are thinking about how to do the works near a tree, we tend to be there and check. So there is national guidance on how to work with trees, and the inspectors are able to check that this is followed a lot better. I'm not saying there won't be any incidents, you know, contractors, we can't control them all the time, but I think that's improved a lot because of the resource that's there now, funded through the permit scheme.
Thank you. Can I ask a supplementary to that? You mentioned that we've now got 5 full-time inspectors and that each site is visited. In the paper, it says that sites are visited after the works have happened. So I guess my question is, are we saying that every single site is always visited after works are finished?
No, we can't quite cover that. So we've prioritized visiting all live sites because this is where it's dangerous potentially if they've not set up properly. And also this is where we were having a lot of accessibility issues because they were not putting ramps in or they were putting them at gradients that was impossible to use anyway. So we've prioritized the live sites for the safety and the accessibility. And then the way the Act works is when we inspect a site afterwards, we only get paid for a certain amount of inspections and the rest the council has to fund itself. So we wouldn't be able to pay for an additional inspector to inspect all the works afterwards. But we are probably reaching about 60–70% of the works. So it's much better than it used to be because of the extra resource.
And in deciding the percentage of sites which do get inspected after works are finished, is that based on resident complaints during works, things that give you a reason to want to go, or?
So it'll be a mix. So we've got to inspect about 30% of the works through, we get funded for that. So we inspect those and that's across the utilities. But then if some utilities are on a performance improvement plan, if you want, that's how it works. So if they've performed really badly, we can try and improve the performance by inspecting them more. So we would tend to work on this. And then obviously, yes, if there's complaints, any issues raised, then we would tend to inspect that as well.
Thank you. Next on the list, I've got Councillor Hook.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm really relieved reading chapter 20, paragraph 24, that now you have got this regime in place to check, because when they did Poppleton, we're still suffering terribly from sprained ankles and all sorts of things because they've damaged the pavements, damaged the verges. And it's nice that now they're going to the more rural areas that it is actually being done properly and more controlled, and you get the feedback afterwards. The one thing, well, there's two things really that are bothering me. One is this nice list of things at the back that you would like people to stick to. Could you add one for biodiversity? Because this year we haven't seen a single hedgehog and hardly any hedgehog poo in our area, because when they were digging up the roads, this isn't telecoms, and leaving them for about 6 days to get flooded, these great big holes, I'm sure half the hedgehogs in the area just must have fallen down and drowned. And put in reusable squares of something to stop things falling in, that you then take away once it's filled in and then use for the next holes, would just be so brilliant and save biodiversity no end, because that's one big plea. And the other thing is, when telecoms isn't just about digging up under the roads, of course, you've got all these masts and things, and it's how do we influence the sensitivity of the placement of those when you've got conservation areas and pretty little villages that suddenly get these really industrial type of grey stuff put in it, or pylons of massive height. Is there anything you can do about that?
So on biodiversity, we could try. It's not in any national guidance, so I can imagine completely the response we're going to get, because to be fair, utilities tend to say, well, if it's not in the guidance, why should I pay for these extra things? Why should I do this? The costs are passed on to the customers at the end of the day, so they charge. So it's a valid point. I can try and see if we could do something. Masts is a planning issue, isn't it?
Well,
Sometimes
depends how high they are. So from memory, if they're over 30 metres, they require planning permission, or if they're over 25 in a protected area, they need planning permission. But that is from memory piece. Beyond that, it's permitted development, we have no control.
We get notification of them. So as a street works team, we can try and have a discussion with them on maybe not quite here, because it's going to be a problem. It's going to mean narrowing the footway. Could you move it a bit? But that's about all we can do.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Ben Burton.
Thanks. Slightly off topic of what I was going to say, but yeah, I've had planning conditions before about having to leave a plank of wood in a trench so that they can walk out. So anything even that minimal when it comes to hedgehogs, just so they've got a way out. But anyway, yeah, great. I was very first thing I would say. It used to be a bit of a wild west, this one, didn't it? And we often also get criticised for over-regulating things. Everyone likes to complain about the council regulating and putting in permits, but actually this is exactly what they're for, and it's a really good thing. So I just say that. Are we taking any lessons learned away from this in terms of permitting elsewhere? Obviously, it's anywhere we've got limited powers, but also has this also then improved general street work assessments? Is it kind of cross-subsidising slightly in terms of numbers? And then this the last one was just, has contractors' compliance and their performance improved since we've introduced it generally, just because they're now aware that they need to actually do it properly? Do we see that they install better because of this? Previously, they used to do those kind of like 5 centimetre deep cables in the verge and stuff, didn't they?
So on installing better, as long as they are within the guidelines, we can't really do anything. And obviously there was this whole program with the Department for Transport trying to get more telecoms installed and do these micro trenches, and I don't think that's going away. So there still probably will be micro trenching. In terms of management of the sites, etc., yes, that's improved. We still find them. There's still issues, but I think it is looking much better generally.
I think what I would also say, though, 2 things is that we haven't got massive build out at the moment in the way we have had previously. So it's a quieter time. So whilst we've got the mechanisms now, I think we need to be realistic that if we got a significant programme, that could be challenging. I think just to pick up the point Helen made about micro trenching, which is this method of installation which puts a very small and quite shallow trench in, is something that government have pushed to accelerate broadband rollout, which obviously has benefits, but that doesn't necessarily put the cables particularly deep, which then can cause us some challenges further down the line in terms of wanting to change street layout, whether that's for drop curbs, planting trees, those sorts of things. But again, we don't have any control over that.
Thank you. Next, we've got Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I echo what colleagues said about the improvement since 2021 when the permit scheme came in, and in particular the Street Works team. If you ever email them, you get a response really quickly, and they're normally on it pronto. Couple of questions in terms of where there's a contractor that is, because often there's the main telecoms companies, and they say, well, it's nothing to do with us. We've given the work to a contractor. Do we have the ability to ban a contractor from digging up council property? Because I know that's come up a few times in the past where we've said, for heaven's sake, don't let these people anywhere near council assets again. So A, do we have the power? B, do we still have, is it section 58 powers, where we have, the council has lovingly relayed pavements, driveways, road surfaces, only for then Virgin or Talk or whoever to say, right, we're going to dig it all up. There used to be a 3-year period where we could say, no, you can't. Is that still a card we can play if we want to?
So banning a contractor, we can't do that. We can, as I explained earlier, put them on improvement plans where we monitor them a lot more and we inspect them more and we can charge them more. And also, obviously, we can fine them. An extreme case would be we could prosecute them because all these fines are FPNs, so, you know, civil enforcement, but we could decide to actually take them to court instead. So if somebody was really badly behaved, we could decide that that's the way to do it. And obviously then the fines are much higher, but they don't come to us. So it would go to Treasury then. So maybe it's better to take the fines. I think it's a balancing act, isn't it? But if it was really bad, we could take them to court, I guess. Section 58 powers, yes, they exist, but under very specific conditions. So we have to have given notice of the works we were going to do and, you know, various other conditions. And if it's emergency or urgent works, that doesn't happen. So if gas need to come in because there's a leak, they will still dig the beautifully laid road.
Can I just come in as well? I think the sensitivity around using a section 58 to stop it is that sometimes that means that community then doesn't get its broadband connectivity. So it's not always universally popular to use a section 58 because some people will be going, I want me connectivity and me Netflix or whatever it is.
Yeah, or the council website, absolutely. Next I've got Councillor Jane Burton.
During the summer, there was some reports from Micklegate residents who were disturbed during the night at 4 AM with cabling going on, drilling into their bedroom walls, one resident. If that happened to me, I'd call the police, to be honest. What can be done about that? What can we do to stop that? Because I thought there was a limit to only starting work at 6 AM, which also seems very early to do the cabling.
So any cabling on a property needs the property owner's permission. So a utility company, I don't think we've ever quite got to the bottom of what was happening with that one. But to fix cables to a building, you need a way leave from the property owner. So you can't just go and do it. But it's not street works. You don't need a street works permission to attach. So it wouldn't be Helen and I that get in, well, probably is me somewhere in my portfolio, but it wouldn't be street works that would get involved in that. It would be a permission from the property owner that you'd need to put the cable along a building. If it was happening at that time, it would be a statutory nuisance, and we did actually have the public protection teams go out the next night and try and identify what was happening, but they didn't find anything when the public protection teams went out down those streets the next night to try and find any activity as described. So as far as I'm aware, we've never got to the bottom of that, but we did try.
Councillor Kilbane.
Yeah, just to come up, so I was dealing with this both as exec member for economy, but also with residents in my ward. So I think first of all to say that Councillor Ben Burton was right. This used to be the Wild West out there in terms of the companies that were laying cables, and all praise to the team and the permit system for getting on top of this and getting control of it. It is a real success story, but when things are done right, we all just take it for granted, don't we? And kind of say, well, that's the way it should be, and we quickly forget how terrible it used to be. But Councillor Jane Burton is also right that there is one area left that still is pretty much the Wild West out there, and that this is fixing cables onto properties, and that generally tends to happen in the city centre, and if it's within the city walls, then that's UK Fibre Networks. We have had reports of cables being strung across properties without the permission of the property owner. No need for planning consent, even though they're listed buildings. We've had residents woken up by people drilling into their bedroom walls from the outside at 4 o'clock in the morning, and when challenged, the contractors were rebuffed. There is a standard practice now. Cables will be pulled through ducting on a night time in the city centre, and that makes sense because that's when the places are quiet. And actually, the contractors that I've spoken to doing that have been very respectful and quietly going about their work. But I have also been woken up because I live in the city centre by contractors going around shining bright lights on the front of properties, checking them out for cabling. Obviously, I went down to see what was going on because I thought that they were burglars. And it turns out that they were just checking out not just residential properties for cabling. And when challenged, will say things like, well, you've already got cables on there. Well, it's not going to hurt if we put a few more up. And then started shining lights on some of the listed churches that we've got in the city centre with a view to stringing some cables across them as well. So they are pretty much doing what they want. They are difficult to get to grips with because they don't need a street permit. They're not closing streets. They're not undertaking. They're not digging up the roads. So I think this is an area that we do need to concentrate on and have some focus on, because if UK Fibre Networks are instructing their contractors to do this and really bend the rules in the extreme, then it's not an acceptable practice. And actually, it doesn't really work for them, because if they stick cabling up on people's properties without permission, they'll find it getting ripped off again.
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. I mean, this is something I wasn't really aware of, to be honest, but it sounds like a nightmare. But yeah, I would echo the comments made about the improvements. I'm just slightly jealous that a lot of Holgate took the hit before things got better, but I don't think I'm alone there. But yeah, credit to everyone that's made things better. I think I've just got one question, and sorry, James.
Before my laptop died, I managed to pull out the data. There is some data on the open data platform about percentage of properties that have got access to superfast broadband, and York's sitting at about 97% of properties now.
Great. Thanks for that. That's a strong figure, isn't it? My only question now, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here. I think the questions have been really helpful and the answers have been too. I'm looking at section 28 in the paper. It says that street works team requires meetings before the works start, so that highway authorities requirements can be set out early on. And I don't want to create work that doesn't need to exist. But when I read that, I thought, would it be helpful for the relevant ward councillors to be given a heads up around the time that those meetings happen, just so we know it's coming in particular streets, and it might allow us to then ask, you know, what's going to be done to make sure it goes smoothly, because often these things start. We find out about them once the work's begun. But again, I genuinely don't want to create a lot of work that doesn't necessarily need to exist. How easy would that be to let ward councillors know early on?
Well, where we've got new build programmes, I think the ICT team were doing that with ward councillors, where there's a new build planned, a new rollout, you know, a bit of the city is getting new fibre update. They used to organise those meetings. Now, I think that's dependent on the provider playing ball with our ICT team, but that certainly was something that used to happen. As I say, we haven't got any build out of any significant scale at the moment. But yeah, certainly between ourselves we can ask, but we can't force them to do it.
Yeah, I think from memory, we might have got a notification, but it was quite a vague one. So when you start asking what streets and when, the company doing the works weren't really forthcoming, and we were chasing them all the time. But
there's a lot of commercial sensitivity around where build out is happening between the companies, because they're in competition, which is obviously great for the customer but not great for us. But that's why the BT infrastructure is now open to try and limit us ending up with 6 companies trying to put fibre down the same street. Helen?
I wanted to do it anyway, but to direct everybody to the york.gov.uk/roadworks, because that's got the map. It's got all the alerts in advance as soon as a permit is submitted. So it can be, generally these are not major works, so it'll be 10 days, 4 days, depending on what it is. And you can sign up for alerts in your area, so you can see what's going to happen for the next months. And that's one way. If the utilities have not contacted you as a councillor, you can still get an alert and then contact the street works team to ask for more detail if needed. But the telecoms company themselves should be doing the consultation, and we ask them to do it. They don't have to though, so.
yeah, it's a right mixed bag. Some of them cut corners, I think, with their comms, or hire sort of comms consultants to do it for them, which creates another layer. But anyway, I think generally speaking, it seems like things are much more well handled than what they used to be. So again, hats off to officers. I don't have any particular recommendations that come to mind on this item. I think it's on the whole a positive story, without being complacent. Grateful for the report and the information too. Thank you. Which brings me to the final item of business. Yeah, which is looking at the work plan. So I have a little bit of news on this. So let me get my bearings. So for November, colleagues, neighbourhood caretakers will be moved to January. This follows consultation with the relevant executive member. Basically, a bit more time needed to give the committee a meaningful report. I'm happy to allow that. Obviously being clear that it can't just keep being pushed back forever, and I don't think that's the intention. So we're all hopeful that a couple more months, thank you, Councillor Kilbane, a couple more months will allow us to have a decent report and session on that item. So that's now for January, which creates a bit of a problem because it leaves us with one for November and, if untouched, 4 in January. So we have asked if the recycling item for January might be able to come to November, but I appreciate it might not be that straightforward, and this is where James comes in.
We can certainly bring you a report on recycling with facts and figures, which I think is what you're keen to look at and where options lie. The only thing I would say is if we bring it forward, what I won't have, because recycling rates include garden waste, is any figures yet on the impact of any changes as a result of our charging for garden waste project. So whilst I can bring you a report, you might want it in January because it will show you that impact as well. But I can do either, but I just need to be clear with you, it won't have those figures in if we bring it in November.
Okay, I mean, I think first, I mean, I'm thinking out loud here, colleagues. I could live with a recycling item in November and still do garden waste in January, because that item was also more looking at how the new charging regime has been implemented, how that's working, rather than a discussion on recycling as a whole and how residents can recycle more. I think this comes from one of your suggestions, Councillor Stewart, a few meetings ago. So I accept it's not ideal, but I mean, I'd be okay with that. Councillor Fenton.
I'd probably suggest the opposite.
Okay.
In terms of if we can have it sort of a thematic meeting where we cover recycling, including composting, because some of the findings from the first few months of charging for garden waste may have a bearing on that conversation in terms of, you know, we know that take-up's been sort of higher than anticipated. What does that tell us in terms of you know, an appetite for home composting? So it leaves a bit of a gap in November, but on the other hand, putting it in January, would it mean we've got too much to talk about? It's difficult without kind of sort of seeing the breadth of the kind of reports. I mean, would the bags to bins be here are some ideas for scrutiny to kick around and come up with recommendations in terms of how that's taken forward, in which case that might be a much bigger item if we're being asked to give sort of feedback to inform a decision rather than simply receiving a report about bags to bin. So I don't want to overload it. Obviously, I think personally it would be preferable to keep those items together if it doesn't make too unwieldy a meeting in January.
So yeah, my fear is January will be a big one, with neighbourhood caretakers added into it.
Of course, I've forgotten about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Colleagues, any other thoughts? Councillor Stewart, sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how the pre-election period comes into being with by-elections. Does it or doesn't it? And it's something I think
you won't be busy anyway, will you? So
Sorry?
Never mind.
No, we're not taking it for granted that we're going to win it. We'll be fighting for every vote. But if we have some sort of pre-election period for by-elections, you know, I do think the council overdoes it in terms of worries. There'd be no risk if we talked about something like garden waste 2 days before the actual by-election, that people might start saying, "Oh, we can't discuss this or we can't discuss that." Would there?
I mean, is there a pre-election period for a one seat by-election? Do we know?
I would honestly have to check. I'm assuming there would be some things that, yeah, would probably be crossing the line on, but yeah, I'd probably want to check with the monitoring officer to what items could, you know, be impacted by that.
So, and just to be clear, I would have no issues. I think we massively overdo the worry about what, you know, does and doesn't impact, but I just don't want us to sort of say, we'll schedule this, and then some far off conversation sees it canned and binned and everything like that, so.
Yeah, fair enough, councillor Stewart. James, sorry.
Just to support what Robert said, I think at the end of the day, it's the monitoring officer's discretion, so he will look at the agendas and decide what does and doesn't go forward.
Okay, now, with that in mind, I'd like to ask if the committee can allow me with the vice chair to pick this up with Dem Services and just find the best possible option given where we're at. Thank you. So that concludes that no, it doesn't conclude that item. Councillor, have you got your hand up as well? I'll go to Fenton, Councillor Fenton first, and then Councillor Merritt. Sorry.
I was just going to pick up what Councillor Merritt mentioned earlier around the data in the finance and performance monitor about gender pay gap and how it being the data looking a bit odd. We have got gender pay gap on our list of potential scrutiny topics. So I was just going to say, can we tentatively pencil that in for either March or April, please?
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to. That's what that list at the bottom is for. The unallocated items, and we've got meetings to fill. So I mean, I'm very comfortable with that, and we can flesh out what we ask for too. Councillor Merritt.
It was on the same issue of perhaps seeing if there's something we could find to for the next meeting to make it a little bit more worthwhile. But I wondered, particularly in terms of the list of items at the end, the York Central. Once the master developers start progressing their plans, could this committee have a role? I just wondered where, you know, it's gone a bit quiet for some time, but we know that they're beavering away. I just wondered whether we have any sense of when that might be worth coming back to.
I mean, there is, I should point out, guessing, well, sometimes York Central related items go to Councillor Fenton's committee. Now, there are obviously dividing lines. Have you got York Central pending at all on your?
Yeah, so we've got it on, but that's more in terms of high level project, you know, major project management and delivery. I think this anticipates some of the more kind of granular detail that will be at placemaking, but which we wouldn't get into a CSMC. We'd say, well, that, you know, we're just focusing more on kind of high level delivery rather than. So there's no reason why it can't be on.
Okay, yeah. I mean, go on, James.
I mean, I don't want to prejudge the report, so you bring that discussion forward about what role the committee could play. I think it's one of negotiation and persuasion. I think there's a regulatory process which some of you will be involved in through the planning process, and you will want to make sure that you don't prejudice yourselves from that process potentially, or you might want to. Yeah, I think the role the committee could play is one of asking and persuading rather than having a formal role in the regulatory process, obviously.
Yeah, and you know, and for what it's worth, the master developers, from my early experience of them as a ward councillor to date, they seem very keen to engage, and they've come to a couple of ward committees already. We'll pick that up and try and get them in, because they're keen to get scrutiny and feedback on some of their top level aims, you know. So yeah, I'll take that on board, Councillor Merritt. And we've got the gender pay gap suggestion from Councillor Fenton. I'm happy to leave it there if we may, guys. Oh, sorry, Councillor Healy, forgive me.
On the 10th of December meeting on economic development, do we want to invite either the mayor of the combined authority or a representative of economic development to come to that? Because a lot of our responsibilities seem to have moved up to the mayor now, but we don't seem to have made any changes.
And this was some of the thinking behind this item. Again, something Councillor Stewart initially requested for the work plan. Yeah, I mean, we can try. I want that discussion to be as useful as it can be.
You can only say no.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll give it a go. See what they say. I will bring that item to a close and the meeting to a close now. Thank you all for your contributions tonight, and to James for once again fielding pretty much all of it. It is appreciated, and I hope you all have a good evening.